Hey listeners, this episode is brought to you by EF World Journeys. Today's travelers want more from their vacation. That's why more people are turning to travel professionals to help them explore the world with confidence. For nearly 35 years, EF World Journeys has been the go to guided experiential travel company for leisure travelers who want to learn more about people, places, and cultures around the world. Its brands EF Ultimate Break, EF Go Ahead Tours, and EF Adventures serve everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers and help tens of thousands of US and Canadian travelers every year explore 400 bucket list destinations. EF World Journeys is one of North America's biggest guided group tour companies, and its expert planned immersive itineraries focus on the big moments and little things that make travel and meeting new people so rewarding. It's experiential travel that goes deeper, where every journey builds a connection, inspires wellness, and fuels a lifelong love of learning. EF World Journeys, guided by experts, driven by curiosity. To learn more, go to efworldjourneys.com.
Hello, and welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm your co-host, Seth Borko, and thank you for joining us today. My other co-host, Sarah Kopik, is traveling. She's in Saudi Arabia, which we're going to hear all about on future episodes. But don't worry, you're not going to have to just listen to me blab on for the full podcast. We've got an excellent co-host stepping in for Sarah. It is Gordon Smith, airline editor, who runs all of our airline coverage on Skift and on Airline Weekly. Gordon, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Seth.
We're going to hear about all things airline with Gordon. And yes, Seat Guru, the TripAdvisor-owned subsidiary that have a long history of being able to look up your flights and get little reviews of each individual seat. This bulkhead is great. This window doesn't open. This one's next to the galley. That's what they call kitchen.
Oh, yeah. That was always it. Proximity to the galley may be troublesome. I'm like, this one guy who wrote it up, back in 1996, whatever it may be. I'm speculating horribly. Probably just had a bad experience with the galley, and ever so, from that point onwards, the galleys have thereby been known as being troublesome.
But see, I disagree with that because I love a bulkhead, and the bulkhead tends to put you close to both the bathroom and the galley, which are traditional no-goes. But I just love, it's worth it for the bulkhead seat for me. I think it's the best seat on in the back of the bus, so to speak. Not the best seat that doesn't lay flat is the bulkhead seat, in my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Gordon.
Yeah, I think that's pretty widely accepted. There can be some great bulkhead seats in the business class cabin as well. Not that I'm flying on Skift Dollar in business class, but in a previous life, I did have an opportunity to do that more often than not. And usually row one, depending on the config, you can have an even better seat. So we have seen some airlines recently almost capitalize on this by saying, not all business class seats are made equal. We can have a sort of super business class seats. So Virgin Atlantic's done that on the A330neos. We've got Starlux doing that as well on the 350s. Air New Zealand as well, off the top of my head. So it's a sort of business plus setup. So they're like, we know the seat's even better than the rest, and we can monetize that.
Did you see? I think I saw that there was a lawsuit because United Airlines, which I fly a lot and I have a lot of thoughts on, was charging for a window seat because they know that that's a premium seat. But the window was broken, or there wasn't the way that the seats had been configured. There was no window, so they charged someone for a window seat, and it was just the position of the seat. It was basically just charged them to. Basically, it was a not middle seat charge, but they didn't sell it like that. And then the guy sued them because, hey, I paid for a window. Where's my window?
And the flip side of that, Seth, is Ryanair that has been able to leverage Seat 11A, which on the, I think it's the 737-800. So that's the NG. That's the sort of classic version. They do have some Maxes. So it's a different config, but that's really getting into the weeds. If you do enjoy this level of detail, then jump across to my podcast, which is the Airline Weekly Lounge with Jay Shabbat. But to keep things top line for our slightly more broad audience here, Ryanair was selling a window seat without a window. It's just where the aircraft does not have a window. And this got picked up by social media. Hey, Ryanair, what's the deal? Paid for a window seat. It doesn't have a window. And they flipped that from a negative into a hyper positive. So I was able to speak to Dara Brady, the chief marketing officer at Ryanair, just last month. And he was saying it's wild. It's become their most popular booked seat anywhere on the aircraft now. So if you're social media minded, you can go on, take the photograph, tag Ryanair, and you might get a little roasting. So win-win for everyone.
So can we let's by the way, this is a crossover episode. If you are listening to this podcast and you're enjoying the high level banter and all that stuff, then stick around. If you're like, I need to know more about the new engine option on on my Airbus, then you definitely go over to the Airline Weekly podcast. Let me ask you, Gordon, and we're speaking of Ryanair,
Mm.
airline marketing. I think this is a very broad topic. I think Ryanair does such an amazing job. All these other airlines, they want to sell you on the beautiful view out the window. They want to sell you on the amazing destinations and the network they've built. They want to sell you on their loyalty plan. They want to sell you on the food, which outrageous to me. I can't believe anyone books flights based on airline food, but we can talk about that if you want to. But Ryanair is happy to sell you on just how bad their service is, and they will roast you on they have the best social media. They'll make fun of you. They'll say you got what you paid for. Why are you complaining? Why are you I mean, what is going on with that Ryanair marketing program? I think that is such a fascinating little niche.
It is fascinating, and it's a acknowledgement that they're never going to win any prizes for comfort or for customer service per se, but they are absolutely stringent on safety, and they will always get you to your destination in one piece. Beyond that, there's no promises around, are you going to have the most comfortable flight you've ever had? Probably not. Is the airport going to have all the bells and whistles? No, it might be slightly out of town versus your usual airport. Although that's sort of not quite as bad as it once was. They got a lot of bad rep in the 90s about Brussels Charleroi, for example, which is a good bit out of town. Paris Beauvais, which again is a good way out of town compared to your Charles de Gaulle's and even your Orly's. But they are flying to more large airports now. But I think it's an acknowledgement, Seth, and this transcends not just the travel sector, but any sector. If you've got a product that you know is not going to necessarily win against a lot of competitors, you need to really play to your strengths. And sometimes your strength is the fact that we are no frills and we enjoy that. But shameless plug for a couple of features from myself at Skift. I spoke to both Michael O'Leary, the group CEO of Ryanair, about marketing, and also Dara Brady, who I just referenced a few moments ago. And both of them say the same thing. It's about creating noise, but not at any cost. So Michael O'Leary describes himself as the original sort of creator of social media, even before we knew about Facebook and X and everything else, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you want to have as your flavor of the month in terms of your social media platform of choice. He was making noise. He got a tank, a World War II era tank, to drive up to Luton Airport, which was the base of EasyJet. It still is a low cost competitor at the time. That he was declaring war on low fares and everything else. There, he got a hearse, a funeral car, to drive up to the departure lounge at Dublin Airport, and that was the death of low fares. So, and you obviously that generates endless column inches, particularly back in the newspaper days when
When there
there
were
weren't
actual
as many
inches
characters
on
around.
columns, when you actually measured
Precisely,
columns and
precisely.
inches. Uh,
And really, what they're doing, what they're doing nowadays, Seth, is just transferring that to the social media world. So they have a dedicated sort of crack team of people in house that are basically tasked with just get people talking about us. And what's been really clever in the past couple of months, in particular, but more broadly across the past couple of years, it's not just roasting memes and everything else. They're starting to get some of the broader commercial messaging through. So air traffic control, they're very
mhm.
sort of they're lobbying very, very intently at European level around some reforms around that. EU 261, they've got some movement that they want around that as well. And even as we're recording today on on November 12th, they have just launched their digital only boarding pass. So you now cannot print off the boarding pass and take it to the Ryanair departure gate. You will have to have it on your phone. There are a couple of exceptions. They said it's 100% if you're flying from Morocco or every Turkish airport apart from Dalaman. You still need to have an old fashioned boarding
I
pass.
like to
But
keep
anyway,
I like to keep my plane tickets sometimes. Am I the only
I
one?
was going to say,
I I find it very hard to throw out an airline ticket for whatever reason. It just gets filed away somewhere, but I keep them. I think they're such great mementos
even if it was a crummy flight.
because it's more of a memento of the trip, not the flight. So it's more
Okay.
like, oh, I was in Casablanca and that was my Morocco trip. I think it's fun. And I've been to Boet. I don't know if I ever told you the story. I was flying with now defunct Silver Airways, which is a very
Oh
small
yes.
airline in the Bahamas,
Lovely,
and
lovely pink liveries.
they had awesome liveries and great turboprop planes, which I just think turboprops are so much fun. Just loud, you wanna know that you're in a machine, not some of this. Just kidding. Well, not really, but um, and the power went out in the airport, and they hand wrote me a ticket. They hand wrote the ticket. They
Hey.
had printed out the manifest, and they had it on one of these old sheets with, the what do they call those old printer sheets where the edges are perforated? You know what I mean? Like it came out of like an old school
Oh, yeah,
computer
like a
system.
telex or a
Yeah,
fax
yeah, yeah,
machine, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And they had it, and they said, "Oh, Seth, you're on the manifest. Here's your seat assignment." And they wrote me a hand ticket. So that was on the one hand an incredible inconvenience. On the other hand, I kept it. And then I tried to call United Airlines and get points for it, and that was a disaster. But that's okay. That's a
Good
different
luck.
story. It's a different story. But back to Ryanair on
Yeah.
their marketing front. Their marketing, it's bombastic, it's aggressive, it's getting out there, it's maximizing their dollars, but it's also kind of an acknowledgement that what a lot of us in the industry seem to think is true, which is that passengers don't really care about the experience as long as they can get a low fare. And that seemed like Ryanair really seems to not just acknowledge it and not just like some airlines will maybe pretend that that's not true, but then compete on fare. Ryanair is very happy to say, yeah, this is who you are. Hold up a mirror to the flying public, perhaps. What do you make of that? I mean, is that a fair assumption about the flying public or not?
I think it speaks more broadly to Seth to the point that consumers are more value conscious. They expect flexibility and transparency, and that is at every point of the industry. It doesn't matter if you're in the legacy carrier, the old fashioned 5-star airline, or at the very very baseline ULCC. Consumers are more value conscious than ever, and you cannot be an airline that ignores that fact. So it doesn't matter what your margin is, certainly in terms of a fare, because the ancillaries and everything else, your add-ons, your reserved seat, your bag, your never mind everything else with regard to car hire and bolt-ons and everything else. The core airfare is becoming increasingly redundant because people sort of know that the airfare that they see is not always going to be the airfare that they eventually end up paying. So when I look at, so, speaking here from Europe, I look at headline prices from Wizz Air, EasyJet, Ryanair. I know in the back of my mind, I'm going to have to take a bag, even if it's not a check bag. That's going to be an extra 30, $40. I know I'm probably going to want to sit next to whoever I'm traveling with. Again, that'll be another 15. So I'm mentally adding all this up in the back of my head. So that very attractive base fare that I see, I know that's already going to be maybe 50% higher. So then when I cross reference with legacy operators that still have some of these perks baked in, that kind of it waters down the value perception. So what I would say is consumers are getting smart, and
Yeah.
airlines are also knowing that consumers are getting smart.
It definitely helps to get your foot in the door. I find that too, that psychology of once I've already paid the money, I forget about it. And then 6 months later when I'm ready to fly and my wife says, "Well, maybe we should upgrade." "Oh, it's only 80 bucks." But I've
Yeah.
already spent the money. There's now it's just, "Oh, I can support 80 bucks. I'm on vacation." As opposed to, well, I could have easily bought the more expensive fare at the start, but I didn't want to because I was comparison shopping. But, this is sort of the heart of the conversation I actually want to have with you, which is that we're talking about value conscious customers, low fare customers. And in Europe, that set of airlines that you just gave, Wizz Air, EasyJet, Ryanair, they are some of the most profitable airlines. Certainly Ryanair, the most profitable on a margin basis, most profitable airlines in the world. Then we come over to
Yeah,
my
plus
my
plus
part of the world.
30% in plus 30% in Q3 in terms of
30%
operating
plus, yeah,
margin.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. 30% plus operating margin for Ryanair in Q3, which is like tech margins. For context, a great airline margin is like 15%. You
I
know?
would be delighted if I was the CFO or just as Joe Public as a shareholder in an airline. 15? Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It, some years it's 8, some years it's negative 15. And for Ryanair to do 30, I mean that's like almost near Visa, Mastercard not quite, but almost near those insane margins. And then we come over to my side of the pond, to the United States, and we look at Spirit and Frontier, which effectively they would say run the same business model. Spirit is going bankrupt. Frontier continues to run at an operating loss. I think I read in your Airline Weekly feature story that they, with maybe one quarterly exception, they have basically not run at a profit since the pandemic, since 2022. And United and Delta, which are full fare, full network carriers, the exact opposite of everything that Ryanair stands for, they're the ones generating the operating margin. So it feels like a bizarro world here in the United States. And I'm trying to make sense of it. And I struggle to. So maybe that's where we dive a little deeper into this topic. What do you think is happening? What has happened in the US such that these low fare carriers are not profitable? Will they continue to be profitable everywhere else around the world?
Yeah, I think it's a really smart point, Seth, to acknowledge that there is an echo chamber sometimes around low fare carriers, and that naturally centers, certainly around the US and to a lesser degree Europe. But it's a big old world out there, and there are low cost carriers of every shape and size across every continent. But you're right, the biggest players are still in the US, Europe, and to a less extent Asia Pacific. There are notable markets that are really, really, really worth watching. But let's just strip it right back to those big three, just for the purposes of this comparison. What is happening in the US is the costs have exploded in the post pandemic era in a way that they haven't elsewhere. And you've got fuel, which affects everyone, but labor costs, ATC costs, you've got factors that are quite quite broad in some senses, but also quite specific to the US. You've also got a very aggressive position from the legacy operators who have really ramped up the attractiveness of their basic economy propositions. So these were frankly seats that were going to go empty anyway. These were
Yeah.
always going to be the seats that they were like, nice to haves. In these, I don't know if you've flown on these before. This is when you get like Group 9, and this is like
Yeah.
end of the end of the end, and you can't upgrade, you can't do anything. Once you've locked that in, you're done.
Gordon, I
But
like that
you
you
are paying a
acknowledge that
very,
I'm
very
not
attractive fare.
I like that you acknowledge that I'm not a Group 9 flyer. I'm not a business class flyer, but I'm not a Group 9 flyer either.
You're a man of the people,
I'm
Seth,
an as
but, I
I'm an
I think
aspiring I'm an
you're
aspiring business traveler.
I mean, what will that's a great other point. What even is a business traveler these days? I mean, it's not necessarily the road warriors. It's not necessarily those who are living on an aircraft like Sarah is at the moment. These are increasingly people that are simply flying for business. They're not necessarily business travelers. I think
That's
that's a
right.
really important distinction to make. And particularly when you're at a smaller firm or if you're a sole trader, you can be a little bit more discretionary around where you spend your dollar and also around your loyalty. So I think that's why we've seen the likes of Barry Biffle, the CEO of Frontier, recently really hammer home his loyalty program. He says, even though we're a ULCC, ultra low cost airline, you can still be loyal to us and we will be receptive, because that was previously one of the failings, which I think tripped up Spirit to a degree. And we've seen some changes from Southwest to their rapid rewards program as well. But Frontier, I think, is the best case study here. They have acknowledged that they've got an opportunity to really attract a customer who is looking for their loyalty to be recognized. And particularly with Frontier, you've got the introduction of new premium seating. They're calling it first class. I think the jury's out on whether that will actually transpire to be something close to first class, but it's certainly a nice seat, and it will have some of the bells and whistles that you would associate with a traditional premium product. But you add onto that the co-branded credit card and some of the other fringe benefits, and you've actually got quite an attractive proposition. And you know, Barry Biffle is actually a very, very good follow on LinkedIn. I don't know I don't know him well enough if it's his team that's writing it, but I get the impression that it's him genuinely just
I think you can
hitting the
tell.
keys.
I think you can usually tell when it's a team that's writing it.
Well, Barry, I don't know. Give us a call, send us an email if I'm speaking out of turn here, but I think it is Barry almost all the time, and I love that because it seems really, really personable. If it is his team, then they're doing a great job of sounding like him. Anyway, my point is Barry's often sort of addressing obviously that sort of bubble in LinkedIn, sort of slightly more corporate audience, saying, sure, if you're with the loyalty program of one of the big guys and you're an overbooked flight, great, you've got status, but so does 50% of everyone else on that aircraft. You are just a number to them. Come across to us. Yes, we're smaller, but we recognize loyalty because we frankly have fewer high status members in our loyalty program, chances are you're going to get that upgrade more often. We're going to be able to get you rebooked with a priority. So I think there's something to be said there.
Can I?
The
So I
sorry, how do you
I
go?
I heard I heard you say three things in your answer there that I just want to
Only
summarize and make
three?
sure I've got them right. Three big points. What I heard you
Okay,
say was that, and I think this is a great distinction that I like to say to people: a low cost carrier does not refer to the prices they charge. That's their fares.
totally, totally.
The low cost part of low cost carrier refers to the operating cost. So I heard you say that a low fare airline with high cost is a bankrupt airline. That's part one. Although you need to have so the costs have gone up. They're not so low cost anymore. I heard
Yep,
you say, um, the we would call this merchandise. And I heard you say that the network carriers have developed a lower fare product, so there's more competition for lower fares. And I heard you say loyalty, that these other airlines haven't built that the low cost carriers haven't built as strong a loyalty program as the larger airlines have. And this comes back to our, by the way, our boarding group conversation, which is exactly right, that I have concentrated a lot of my flying on two airlines, on JetBlue and United Airlines, so I can have loyalty on them so that I can buy a cheap ticket and get boarding group 1, 2, or 3. And also so that I can have it wherever I want to fly, which comes down to network, which is that United Airlines has a much bigger network than some of these low cost airlines. And so if I have status on United, I can buy an economy class ticket to pretty much anywhere in the world and get early boarding group. I'm not going to have to check my bag. I'm going to get somewhat earlier board and I might get an upgrade. I might get whatever. So the loyalty piece is also, I think those are three great points. So they've lost the low cost advantage. They've got more low fare competition and they don't quite have the same strength of loyalty as their larger competitors. Is that a fair summary of what's happening?
it is a fair summary, with the big caveat that we were drawing comparisons with Europe.
That's where I was going
There
next.
are there are no loyalty programs worth talking about among low cost carriers in Europe. You do have these sort of all you can fly plans at Wizz Air, a la Frontier, and you do have Ryanair, which Ryanair Prime, I think they called it. I think there's maybe someone in the Amazon offices who've got some. Their ears
Yeah.
have been twigged.
Yeah.
Prime, really? Yeah.
Trademark. Is there a
Um,
trademark lawsuit there?
clearly not. You
Well,
think Ryanair would have done their homework there?
eDreams has a Prime. That could be a confusion
That's
in the
true.
marketplace.
Yeah, prime galore. But my broader point is there are little bonus perks for Prime, and there's talk of EasyJet doing something a little bit more substantial in the loyalty space, particularly with the big changes to the British Airways Executive Club, now just called the British Airways Club. At the start of the year, that upset a lot of people. But more broadly, it's fair to say Europe is able to make low cost without loyalty work. And I think the US consumer in particular, maybe because of the different credit card environment and
It's 100%
other
the
aspects.
you're tiptoeing. I'm gonna say it's 100% that. We see that on our Skift research survey. European loyalty is so much lower because it doesn't have that credit card tie-in, and it doesn't have the credit card tie-in because it doesn't have the interchange. So basically,
Sure.
the giant pools of money that fund the credit card partnerships in the US don't exist in Europe. So I think that's 100% it. That frankly, I mean, you tell me if you disagree. I don't think that the BA loyalty, the Air France loyalty, the KLM loyalty comes anywhere close to the level of perks that the Deltas, Americans, United offer.
It depends what you define as perks.
What do you think? I mean, I just don't think that the programs are as strong. It's a lot harder to earn points, in my opinion.
Yes. So one of the big defenses from IAG loyalty when they made the changes, or they announced the changes on New Year's Eve 2024, was that this system of you earn points and status based on how much you spend as opposed to how far you're traveling is already adopted by US carriers, and it has been for years, and it works very well. The detail there that was missing was the dynamic and the ecosystem around loyalty and how you accrue points and how
Hmm.
you're rewarded with those points in the US is very, very different. So it wasn't a direct comparison in my view. But I do think we are going to see more developments in the loyalty space, just broadly. I also enjoy the disloyalty program. I was staying at what was it? It was the Hoxton Hotel
It's
in
Ennismore.
Brussels,
Yeah.
and
Hoxton
it's
is
more
owned by
exactly right.
Ennismore. Yeah, disloyalty is so much
And
fun.
I really enjoyed it because I'm sort of in my little bubble around airlines. I'm not as tied in as Sean O'Neill or some of our colleagues on Skift, or even yourself are around hospitality space. I'm a bit more of a sort of Joe Public consumer when it comes to staying in a hotel. I'm sort of in the floodlights a little bit, but they introduced me at the check-in desk about disloyalty. I was like, "What? Disloyalty?" And they said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah." It was a revelation for me as a consumer that someone acknowledged that loyalty as a principle was important, but they knew that they could do something different,
Well,
and that fascinated me.
this is something Skift Research talks about a lot, and I say this a lot, which is that in so many of these big corporations, and especially on the hotel side where you've got the Marriott Bonvoy programs, but I would argue United, Delta, American have done this as well. Loyalty has become a points program. Loyalty refers to a program that is managed. When, of course, loyalty, as we all know, is an emotion. I'm loyal to a brand because I feel an emotional connection to a brand. And I think a lot of these large brands, as they've scaled, have lost that emotional connection and it's become very transactional. And I think that's to their detriment. I mean, it drives a huge amount of business, but I think it's to their long term detriment. I think to their short term benefit, to their long term detriment. And, Ennismore, Hoxton, with their disloyalty, gives you a free cup of coffee I think it's almost any time you come in, and it's to encourage locals to come in and use their lobby as a cafe space. And I think that's so cool, and that's something that so many travel programs struggle with is how do you engage in my everyday life? Um, and, um, and disloyalty does that well. But things are gonna change in the US, by the way. There's just been a huge settlement that is in the process of being signed with Visa and Mastercard around interchange fees. So, let's come back to this core comparison on airlines. And again, you can tell me if I got these 3 points wrong, but on low-cost carriers struggling in the US where they succeed elsewhere in the world because the networks have gotten better at selling low fares, the low costs have gotten higher, and loyalty. And let's say in Europe, loyalty is not a factor for all the reasons that we've been discussing, different interchange fees, different things. Um, why haven't the large European network carriers, and then I would say on cost, let's talk about this idea of unbundling and merchandising seats. Why haven't Air France KLM or British Airways or Lufthansa been as successful in selling basic economy seats as Delta, United, and American have been? Or have they been? And I'm wrong about that. Why hasn't competition from, like you call them in the US, those unused seats that are now being sold as basic economy fares by US network carriers? Have the European carriers have started to do that? Have they been as successful? Why haven't they had as much market share gain in this basic product as in the US? If you have any thoughts on that.
I think the differential between what constitutes basic economy in the US and among the big 3 European airline legacy groups is a little different. So my understanding is that if you fly basic economy on a US major, sometimes you don't even get a
Oh,
overhead.
it's basic. It's real big. Oh,
It's
you will not get an overhead. I mean,
okay.
some of them do not even include it, and because you're in boarding group, like American Airlines has a million boarding groups and I actually, believe it or not, have been in those boarding groups. Because you're in boarding group 500, even if you theoretically have overhead space assigned to it, the guy in boarding group 499 takes your boarding space before they boot.
That pesky 499er.
But yeah, that's
Yeah,
correct. That's a correct
yeah,
assumption.
so, I fly with the European majors quite often, and usually on a basic economy fare, more often than not, unless I'm going away for a long time and I need to check in a bag or whatever else. But my point is, Seth, that basic economy isn't quite as nasty in Europe. You're still gonna get that overhead bag, and you're still gonna get a few of the bells and whistles. So, I think the difference between the sort of classic product and the basic product isn't quite as nuanced. So, again, just bringing it back to British Airways, which is an airline that I know well, being sort of born and raised in the UK and having followed them quite closely, is yes, when you book an economy fare, the default setting will be economy, and that will give you a no allocated seat, but you'll get two pieces of hand carry, the personal item and the overhead bin, and you don't get to pick your seat unless you want to. You have economy plus or a variation of that. We're talking about short haul here, and that will give you the opportunity to maybe select a seat, have a check bag, a few of the nicer bits and pieces, and then of course you've got the uh, Euro business class, which is an entirely separate discussion because there's a lot of haters out there who say it's exactly the same seat. They've just blocked out the middle seat. You get a crummy little soggy sandwich, and it ignores all the fringe perks. You get the fast track at security, you get the lounge access. You're in boarding group 1 or 2. You do get the open bar and the food and everything else. There are a lot of perks apart from just the same sort of slightly crummy seat, to put it politely. But to your point, it's because basic economy isn't quite as basic.
Is that crummy? Back on the business class because I love business class. Is that because the aircraft are older, or is it just a difference in mentality around how
It's all
they've
to do,
built and
it's all
designed?
to do with it's all to do with flexibility, Seth. So you might have a flight that's going from London to Rome, and they know there's a big conference in Rome, and you got loads of people who are flying on corporates, connecting traffic as well. So lots of nice juicy business class fares from New York to London, transiting down to Rome, and they might have 14 rows on an A320 of business class. Coming back, they might only need 4, and they have got exactly the same seat available, and all they need to do is move that divider down when they're on the ground
Well,
at Fiumicino.
back to this U.S. versus Europe comparison, which has sort of become the topic of this podcast. Why don't American are they basically just counting on American Airlines and even British that you're gonna get that nice lay flat on the transatlantic portion, and they're just gonna siphon off that connecting traffic to Rome, and you book a business class ticket all the way from New York to Rome, you connect in London, and then you just get this whatever business class product for the last leg that doesn't matter? Or, I mean, why don't
Well,
American Airlines do that? When they
the
do a
the
little
stage
bit.
lengths the stage lengths are very different as well. There's not many places that you would regularly go in Europe that is not 2.5 hours. It seems to be I have a little running joke. Every flight I've been on seems to be 2 hours and 10 minutes in Europe. I literally don't I think you just go up into the air and you get spun around. After 2 hours and 10 minutes, you
Yeah, they
land.
just circle.
It
They just circle.
Exactly. There's no logic to it. It doesn't matter whether I'm going from A to B or T to Z, or it doesn't matter. It always seems to be
So
2 hours and 10 minutes.
geography is destiny. The geography of Europe just means that because your flights are there's so many great world-class cities within 2 to 3 hours, and there are business class flyers going to theirs. They need to be flexible enough to capture those, as you said, juicy business class fares. Um, and they just don't need to configure an entire aircraft for long haul. Whereas in the US, it feels the opposite way. If I get on a plane, I'm flying for at least 4 or 5 hours minimum. Even my flights to Florida seem to be 4 hours somehow. My flights to San Francisco, where my sister lives, 5 hours. My flights to London, 5 hours. My flights to wherever, I'm just going to be flying for 5 hours no matter what I'm doing. My flights to Chicago, because I'm going to get delayed, they're going to be 5 hours because something's going to happen in O'Hare. It's going to be 5 hours guaranteed. So maybe that's that. So that's a piece of it too.
I think that definitely is, Seth. What I would say is also it's kind of like I don't want to use the term race to the bottom. It's so overused, but they're all equally poor. It doesn't matter if you're talking about SAS or Lufthansa or Air France, KLM, whoever it may be. I'm not picking out anyone here. European business class across the board is terrible in terms of the hard product. And you're going to have a lousy product, but you're going to get the champagne. You're probably going to get a few prawns on the plate, and you're going to get the various airport perks that we've already discussed. The fact that they're equally bad across the board means that there's no real appetite for any single operator to say, "Hey, we need to do something different to capture market share here." That's what comes with the soft product. What I would say is you get some friction where you got the likes of Turkish Airlines. Istanbul isn't a million miles away, but it's also not around the corner. But they very often will put wide bodies on flights of around 3 to 4 hours, and that's when you get consumers getting a taste of what could be. And by no means, is
Well,
Turkish Airlines is on you
why
go.
can't British compete for long haul premium traffic?
Oh, they
Emirates
can.
does a great job of doing it. Turkish does a great job. Again, Delta does a nice job of it. United does a nice job of it. Why is not British saying, okay, well, I get it. Our 2 hour flight to Rome, we're going to lose, but they can fly to the Middle East. They can and do fly to all these destinations. So can
So
SAS for that matter. Let's not even say British. So can SAS. I can fly long haul from Copenhagen. I mean, I guess it's not a huge hub, but It's just that there's not enough people who would do it, I guess.
What's your? I don't follow.
No, I'm just saying, like, there's these airlines like Turkish, like Emirates, like even some of the US carriers that are willing to invest in premium hard product and say, we are going to commit that X% of our network is going to be long haul. And we just think we got enough business class passengers and even just enough economy passengers who want a nice new airplane to do it. Why can't, I mean, maybe SAS is just too northern for it to work, but why can't um, a Lufthansa, Frankfurt is a very central place. Why can't a Frankfurt compete for connecting traffic like that?
I think it does. You speak to any route manager at any of the European big three, they're going to say connecting traffic is huge. We heard that from KLM just last week in their earnings call. They were lamenting some of the loss of their connecting traffic, particularly from Africa and parts of the Indian subcontinent through to America, because of various macro factors influencing the traffic flows there. The European big three are investing very, very heavily in premium, but it's on the long haul side. So you've got Air France with
Yeah.
Le Premier, you've got the club suites on BA, SAS as well. They've reintroduced very recently a sort of true business class product on the short haul fleet as well. Some big changes around Lufthansa and their Allegris product, and that's the Lufthansa group, not just Lufthansa mainline. So there are great premium experiences to be had on European metal, but it's on the wide body fleet.
So I've got one more serious question to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. And I've got some fun questions for you. But on these three
Sounds good.
points of loyalty, totally different in Europe, on the basic economy, on the basic fare, and just the level of the hard product and the network and the fare in Europe, totally different. And it's all starting to click for me now as to why things are so different for low cost carriers in Europe versus US. The final piece is the cost itself. And I am shocked to hear you say we were talking way at the top about cost structure of these low cost carriers. Europe is traditionally, it just seems like everything is topsy turvy with Europe. Europe should be the high cost place. Europe, with its unions and its labor rules and all of this stuff, should be more expensive. How come the US is getting so much more expensive? Have we secretly adopted a European mindset to labor cost without anyone knowing about it?
It's a great question. I think the unions are very different. Europe is traditionally more unionized, but that's not always the case in every subsector. So I think that's a great
Wizz
point,
Air is in
Seth.
Hungary.
Uh,
Maybe that's like the loophole. Sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
Not at all. No, no, but it speaks to a broader point as well. Ryanair was a EasyJet. They have very varying operational cost bases. No one's as lean as Ryanair by most of the metrics, but what you will see is a huge variance. Even comparing Southwest, which Herb Kelleher and Michael O'Leary, going back to the early '90s, sort of legendary conversations that O'Leary had in Dallas with Herb Kelleher, the Southwest co-founder. You look at Southwest operating costs now, and they are not those of a low cost model. And back to your earlier point about low cost being different from low fare, these are very, very high. And when you've got to get to a certain threshold just to cover your costs, then that's when things start to get rather tricky. And there is nuance in the US market. The stage sectors are longer, so you are going to be typically be paying a higher fare because you're generally going to be traveling further. But I would say, Seth, it's one of the big themes that the aviation historians will probably look back on this post-pandemic period and examine how so many US airlines were able to get their costs just spiraling out of control. A lot of that has been macro and way out of their control, but there are fixed costs internally that arguably with hindsight, and it's very easy here to sit on a podcast and say you should have done that, you couldn't have done that.
Yeah,
But
or armchair
a
quarterbacking.
lot absolutely. A lot of costs that have been within their control, be it labor contracts or be it through charges or just frankly reckless expenditure. So it all still comes back down to costs. I think there'll be a lot of people wishing they'd done things differently. And we are paying the price for that because you are seeing casualties in the airline sector. Obviously, Spirit in its second bankruptcy and Frontier trying the best it can to turn itself around. And I'm hopeful for Frontier. I know we wanted to touch on that a little bit. anyone that wants to go into a bit more detail on Frontier, I would encourage you to read Jay Shabbat. He's our senior analyst at Airline Weekly. His fantastic feature published last week. It was looking at whether Frontier, whether its biggest strength is the fact it's independent, or whether that's its biggest weakness. I
Yeah.
mean, and I love that. When Jay and I discussed that as a concept, I was like, dang, it still clicked. Because there's no straight answer. There's pros and cons to both, but the creeping, I don't even know if it is creeping anymore. It's more of a jungle beat of the drum of consolidation is getting louder and louder around the world, and the US is not immune.
Well, that goes to that point about networks because Megna, who's also a wonderful reporter, did a whole story about how JetBlue is basically building mini hubs, and they're trying to consolidate a mini hub in Fort Lauderdale. They've got one in New York, and they're trying to. We talked about at the Transatlantic Summit. They're trying to fly transatlantic to European destinations. They're trying to do partnerships with European and other airlines. They've been they've been trying desperately to do ties with other, and so they're basically tying into loyalty programs and networks that feel a lot more like a network carrier. Back to this loyalty conversation we were having earlier, whereas Frontier, who is independent and doesn't have the loyalty, I was surprised earlier on in the show you said Frontier is saying, "Well, if you get canceled, we'll rebook you faster." The constant challenge for low cost carriers is that they can't rebook you because they fly point to point and they don't have networks and they don't have backup planes, so to speak. If your flight to St. George, Utah gets canceled, you're waiting there until, or from St. George, Utah gets canceled, you're in trouble because, uh, anyways.
Yeah, frequency comes into that, Seth. I was speaking at the Skift Global Forum East, which you were obviously at as well. I'll forgive you if you don't remember every nugget of my conversation
Oh,
with Antonio
I
Neves.
tuned in. Oh, sorry. Say that again. Say that
But
again.
even no problem at all. Yeah, brings me on to the Skift Global Forum East, Seth, and I know you were there as well, but I'll forgive you if you weren't digesting every single nugget of my conversation with Antonio Neves, the group CEO at Etihad. He was making the case for not just routes. I've started saying routes as well since I started at Skift. It's routes. Sorry, routes, whatever you call them, ROUTES. 31 new destinations at Etihad, either announced or launched this year alone. At the start of the year, they were expecting 10, which is just phenomenal. But lots of headlines around just how many new destinations, I'm going to avoid the R word again, that Etihad has launched or announced in the past 12 months. But he was making the case for frequency as well. And he said, you're only as good as your schedule. Because it doesn't matter if your airline, he literally said this, it doesn't matter if your airline's selling flights for $1. If the timings don't match up, if you only fly
Yep.
once a week on a Friday and you want to go on a Monday, there's only so much give that the consumer is going to take. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And to your point around Frontier, I think low cost airlines have got better around recognizing that they have to do the frequency game as well as the route game. There are a few exceptions to that rule. You've got Allegiant and others who say, we know people want to fly to Vegas on a Friday and back on a Sunday night. We're going to cater to that. No one wants to fly on a Wednesday. We're going to keep our aircraft on the ground. That's fine. But I would say more broadly, there is a recognition that there's only so fast and loose you can play with the frequencies before someone says, I'm going to go to the big boys who can get me there 3 times daily, with the acknowledgement that if something should go wrong, they can boot me on a 6 p.m. instead of the day 6.
So I guess this is fascinating. I guess the summary in my mind, what I hear is like, it's just a topsy-turvy world for airlines. Everything that you think left is right, up is down. When I look at Europe versus US, which is sort of where this conversation has turned up, in the US, airport infrastructure is publicly run and underfunded. In Europe, it's privatized, and it's very well funded. In Europe, the hard product is worse, whereas in US it's more premium. We've got higher costs here versus lower costs in Europe. We've got somehow our network carriers are both more premium and cheaper at the same time. I know I'm talking in very broad strokes, but it strikes me as just so topsy turvy. Like the US, you'd think would be like rock bottom fares, super cheap, and privatize all the airports, and it's the exact opposite. That's what they've done in Europe, and it's the opposite of what we've done in the US. So I just love that like kind of topsy turvy world, and it's fascinating. And as a result of geography and these trends and all this stuff, and I know I've simplified. I can see you there, Gordon, being like, no, it's not. I can see. I know I've simplified.
As long as we acknowledge there's caveat and nuance.
Yeah, there's a lot of caveat and nuance, but it's fascinating. All right, let's let's wrap up this conversation. I wanted to ask you some fun questions, Gordon, just on the joy
Every
of
question
flying.
you ask me is fun, Seth.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. What is the most, exotic flight that you've ever taken? Because 'Cause you're an airline guy. Where like,
Ooh.
somewhere I don't exotic has different definitions to everyone. I'll tell you my answer. I wanna
Yeah,
know,
go
like,
ahead.
the most, um your part of the world actually, Gordon, and I'm not just buttering you up. I flew with a little airline called Logan Air, which you will know.
The tagline Scotland's airline. It's got the tartan tail.
Scotland's airline, and I flew Logan Air to the to and across the Orkney Islands in northern Scotland. It's famously one of the shortest flights in the world. I didn't fly that flight, but it is a very cool little airline and very cool little islands with all sorts of cool stuff to do there. And that was one where you're like, this is a cool flight. This is an exotic flight, in my opinion. The remote outer islands of Scotland. And I want to hear if you have anything similar.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Seth. Exotic, at least in my mind, can often mean palm trees swaying, golden beaches, and coconuts and everything, but it can actually just mean something that's so alien to the
Yeah,
everyday.
niche, off the beaten path, I guess. Niche is what I'm going for here.
Exactly, and there'll be probably a commuter who lives in Orkney and works in Edinburgh or London who does that flight every day, and it couldn't be any less exotic
Prosaic.
if they tried. But for you coming to Scotland, that was just like probably a highlight.
Yeah,
I would speculate
it was great,
of your
and
trip.
the airports are tiny, and they you basically show up, and there's 5 people, and there's a waiting room, and it feels like a bus terminal, which I know is not exotic in the luxury sense, but it's cool because for me, I'm like, I'm not getting hassled by security. They're all just like, "Oh, yeah, sure, where you going?" And you just walk on the plane, you walk on the runway. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it still gives me goosebumps, and it's still so fresh as well because we get so jaded. We get so jaded by air travel when it is just the humdrum routes. Even if we're traveling to an exciting destination, the process of flying, the airport in particular, even if you're lucky enough to be sitting in the front of the plane, the airport process is still pretty
Yeah.
crummy for the most part. Certainly the process, at least until you get to the lounge, boarding is a dilemma, and that's before we haven't even touched on air traffic control,
No,
Seth.
we haven't.
That impacts you whether you're in 1A or by the lavatories in 76K. You know, ATC is ATC, but that's for another day. To your question about exotic flights, I actually would stick to the northern hemisphere.
Mhm.
Even though I've been fortunate enough to travel quite extensively in the southern hemisphere, and I would say it was an opportunity I had with Widerøe, which is a regional airline in Norway. It's now part of the Norwegian group, but when I was with them back in 2019, it was a regional independent operator, and they had a route that started in Tromsø and it worked all of its way up to Kirkenes, which is just within 2 or 3 miles of the Russian border in the extreme north of Norway. And they didn't obviously just fly the A to B. It was almost like you say, like a bus. So some of these sectors were just so short, you wouldn't even take off your jacket. Because it was freezing cold. We were there in January, but also because it was just so routine. It was 5 or 6 minutes, and if you wanted to do this same journey by road across the fjords, it might have taken 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
But the aircraft, a little turboprop, it wasn't even a Dash 8 400. It was Dash 100s and 200s. So really, really small aircraft. And my favorite bit about it was I was in the jump seat for a couple of the sectors, which was great. But um, on the
That is
aircraft, it was
so
Dash
cool.
300, I think. Um, they had backwards facing seats, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
So I was, yeah, I was looking back out into the cabin, so I almost felt like I was flight crew.
yeah, 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 you're like yeah, exactly, that's like the jump seats they take when they're, like, clipped for takeoff. Well, being in and you said you were in the jump seat, or you said you were in the which seat were you in?
Various, so I think there were about 7 or 8 sectors. So I chose to sit in the jump seat in the cockpit, but also to be
Yeah.
in the main cabin and everything else in between. But it was just so fascinating to see how important that
Oh,
Airlink was. We speak all the time about, oh, air travel has become such a commodity, but for people in that part of the world, it is literally a lifeline. There were people that were coming back from hospital, people that were visiting all sorts of important contacts in the big city,
I lo
Tromso, a- and it was just it was quite humbling.
I love regional airlines like that. Maybe that's what we'll do next time we have on the show is just talk about regional airlines. I was in the co-pilot seat on a Tropic Air flight, which is a island hopper in Belize. and
Ooh,
they're flying Cessnas. They're flying the Sky Caravan Cessnas. I, that's those kind of little regional airlines. Um, I love that kind of stuff. Maybe that's our conversation for next time. Um,
well, we need Sarah to go away again as an
yeah,
excuse
yeah,
for us
yeah, yeah.
to chat
Well,
planes.
Sarah's basically trapped in an airplane for the next couple of months, so I'm sure we'll get the opportunity again, and we'll have you back, and we'll talk. We'll talk air traffic control. We'll talk regional aircraft. We'll talk all this sort of stuff more. Gordon, hey, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking geeking on airlines with us. Yes,
I love the opportunity, Seth. Can I give a shameless plug to our Skift Aviation forum as well?
please, please.
Please. What a platform this is to do it. So December 3rd, if you've enjoyed the getting into the weeds of things today, December 3rd in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Sheraton Hotel, I'm going to be joined by we've got a Sharp from your research side. Is that right?
Yes.
We've got Meghna Maharishi, we've got Jay Shabbat, and a few other stars of Skift. Sarah, I think, is due to be there, so she'll be taking another aircraft down to Dallas Fort Worth. But I would say, because this is my second year at Skift, last year was just unbelievable in terms of the energy in the room. And you might expect me to say that it's my show, whatever else. But honestly, I've been to, in a previous life, lots of aviation conferences, events, forums, call them what you want. What we were able to do last year was very, very special. Just cut through the noise and have really honest conversations. And I know Brian and Becca on the programming team have put together a really, really interesting agenda this year. I'm genuinely excited about some of the voices that we're going to have. I have not. We've got the big hitters. We've got Joanna Garrity, the CEO of JetBlue. We've got David Neilman, founder of JetBlue and now of Breeze. We've got the big hitters, the blockbuster names, but we've also got some voices from the industry, C-suite and otherwise, who I've never heard speak before, and I am really, really excited. So live.skift.com if you want to get one of the final tickets. Look forward to seeing you
Yeah.
in Fort Worth.
If you are listening to this plug, it's a no-brainer. If you've made it this far into an airline-focused
Yes,
conversation,
true.
if you are this interested in airlines, then you got to be there. I've been not last year, I've been the years before, and I couldn't agree more with what Gordon said. And I'm not just saying that. It's a great setting. It's great conversations, and it reminds me a bit of this, where you won't be bored. Well, hopefully, maybe you were bored. Hopefully, you won't be. If you're into airlines, you won't be bored, but you will get enough. You will move past beyond surface level without being geeky is what I think
Yeah.
that this conference does so well. And maybe a little bit geeky, pleasantly geeky, but
A
not
little
like
bit
boring,
geeky.
not boring. And yeah, if you've made it this far in this podcast, it's a no-brainer. You got to go. Sarah will be there. Gordon will be there. Shab, our research analyst covering airlines, will be there. And it'll be great. Well, listen, thank you so much again, Gordon. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed this. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, this deep dive into what's happening in airlines, low cost carriers, US versus Europe, what's happening with the world of how the world of airlines is evolving for kind of the more modern consumer and divergent kind of structures between US and Europe. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, give us 5 stars, thumbs up, subscribe, like, follow. I don't know exactly where you consume your podcast, but whatever you do in your app, there's probably some way to give us feedback. We really appreciate it. And don't be afraid to also shoot us an actual email, podcast@skift.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.
Hey listeners, this episode is brought to you by EF World Journeys. Today's travelers want more from their vacation. That's why more people are turning to travel professionals to help them explore the world with confidence. For nearly 35 years, EF World Journeys has been the go-to guided experiential travel company for leisure travelers who want to learn more about people, places, and cultures around the world. Its brands EF Ultimate Break, EF Go Ahead Tours, and EF Adventures serve everyone from Gen Z to baby boomers and help tens of thousands of US and Canadian travelers every year explore 400 bucket list destinations. EF World Journeys is one of North America's biggest guided group tour companies, and its expert planned immersive itineraries focus on the big moments and little things that make travel and meeting new people so rewarding. It's experiential travel that goes deeper, where every journey builds a connection, inspires wellness, and fuels a lifelong love of learning. EF World Journeys, guided by experts, driven by curiosity. To learn more, go to efworldjourneys.com.